What's going on, everybody? Today I'm going to be giving a little lesson on faith, but first I want to give a little praise report to God. So me and my wife, we've been applying for this house that we've really wanted, and we had faith in the Lord that we were going to get approved because we've been praying to Him that we would. So before we even got approved, we both were applying to jobs in the area, and we both accepted jobs in the area before we even got approved. And then a day before I started my new job and a week before she started her new job in the area next to the house that we got approved for, we got approved. So before we even got approved, we already accepted the jobs. So that's just one example in my life how powerful faith was. And having faith in God and what it can do for you. In the Bible, there's many stories about being faithful and the pros of it and what can come of it. But first, let's talk about what faith is. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1 says, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." So it's basically having faith, hoping for things that have yet to come. Matthew 21, verse 22 says, "And all things whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer, believing, ye shall receive." You have to believe in the Lord. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, oh, I believe that I'm going to win the lottery and so I'm just going to ask God and He's going to give me the winning Powerball numbers. That's not necessarily how that works. Not saying that that couldn't work and that couldn't happen. I mean, God is miraculous and He can do amazing things in your life, especially when you trust in Him. But I just don't want you thinking, oh, I'm going to have faith and I'm going to be rich, because you might get disappointed. But some examples in the Bible about how faith it helped out the Israelites was, first one is the walls of Jericho. Okay, they were faithful in the fact that when the Lord said that after the seventh day, or during the seventh day after the trumpets were blown, if they all shouted at the same time, that the walls would come crashing down. And sure enough, what happened on that seventh day, whenever the trumpets were blown and they all shouted, the walls came crashing down and it was theirs for the taking. Another example of how faith worked out in someone's favor in the Bible is Noah building the ark. He had faith that it was going to flood because God had spoke to him prior, and he knew it was going to flood a long time before. So he had built this ark. It took him over a year to build it. And something good that came out of it was, well, first off, he got to live. Everybody else died in the flood. Him and his family got to live, but he also got a much longer life because of it. And he got to see his grandkids after the flood. I think his kids had like 20 to 30 kids, which is amazing. Okay, like God's just so miraculous. An example of what not having faith can do is, and for example, the trip to the promised land that the Israelites were supposed to go to, or they ended up going to, but it took them much longer. It was only supposed to take 11 days, but it took them like 40 years because they didn't believe that God was going to take them there. They kept murmuring to themselves, and then once they got there, they thought that God had actually delivered them into their enemy, so He had cursed them into 40 years of wandering through the wilderness. If they had just been faithful that God was actually going to deliver them to the promised land, then they would have only taken them the 11 days that it took to get there. Another example of not being faithful and the cons of what it can do in your life is Saul. He was supposed to slew all the Amalekites, but instead he spared the king Agag, and he saved the animals and sacrificed them. He was just supposed to kill them all, but instead he didn't do that, so the Lord departed from him. And then once he departed from him and no longer spoke to him, he seeked out a spirit guide, which is basically a witch back then. And this also displeased the Lord even more. And when he found out about that, he had sent blood rushing to his head, gave him massive headaches, and he sent an evil spirit upon him that caused him to go crazy and try and kill his most loyal servant, David, who David was a very loyal and faithful servant to the Lord. He was faithful that he was going to be able to slay Goliath, who was much, much bigger than him. He was a giant. He had a sword and armor. All David had was a little tiny slingshot, and he just hit the giant one time right between the eyes, knocked him out, and then he picked up the giant's sword and cut his head off with his own sword. He was faithful with the Lord, and then after that, after a few more trials and tribulations and serving the Lord and being faithful, he ended up being king after Saul's death. So it's just something to think about. You gotta have faith, because without faith, then you really don't have anything. It also says that if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you could tell this mountain to move and it will move. So God bless you, and I hope that this video has spoken to you. Follow for more.